Yeah. All right. So my name's Elijah, and I will be conducting an interview with Tommy 2600.
Yes.
Yeah. And so yeah, if you could just like introduce yourself and like what you do in the Richmond scene.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. Well, thanks for having me, Elijah. I'm happy to answer some of your questions, and I'm happy you asked me to be a part of this. Really, my background, I've been living in Richmond for a little bit over a decade when I moved here to come study at VCU Arts. It's at college that I really started to DJ properly and like get into more underground music besides like what they call open format or like open maybe like top 40s style DJing. I just like kind of got involved with the student radio station at VCU and then started a radio show here at WRAR just about 2.5 years ago. And I've like been playing shows in Richmond. I organize parties, shows, and have done some fundraisers as well for WRAR. Do a radio show. So I do a little bit of everything. Do radio, do parties and live mixes, and like my own DJing here in Richmond too. So
Okay.
yeah, that's a bit of my background and timeline. Yeah.
That's fair. Yeah. And so so I guess like a question about like the modern DJ, I guess, which is like there seems to be this idea that like modern DJs that come out from like informal gigs or stuff like that, or student DJs, part of their DJing is like a curatorial sense in the like they're curating their own sense like style of music, and they're sort of like expressing that as a form of their identity when they're playing. And then the other sort of like you said open format top 40s type of DJ seems to be like setting the vibe or setting the groove or like tuning everyone into what's popular right now. So like do you see the role of like a DJ as either one or like a combo or
I think it's everything. I mean it's an art form, and it's a very strong one. I think one that's thriving now, especially with the accessibility to DJing compared to what it used to be with vinyl and or CDs. I think I mean the internet, it's kind of like when everyone was able to become a photographer once they had their cell phones, right? And phones in their pocket that could do the same thing. So you have a laptop or access to even like a streaming service. Sometimes that's as easy as it is to get into it. But I mean, it's also a business. There are, especially in nightlife, it's a lot of time in certain spaces, be it like nightclubs or bars, it's more of just like a entertainment thing. So places will hire a DJ, or a DJ will get hired to play like a wedding or something, and yes, provide that atmosphere, but also do it to kind of appeal to the people in the space. Or like they get asked to play certain types of stuff for a wedding. I've done some weddings, and usually there's a process that I'll go under just asking specifics of what the couple would like to hear, what things to play, when to play them, and get a sense of like making playlists for each kind of setting in the night and that kind of environment.
I see.
So I don't know. I do have a foot in each one. Like it's like I do a bit of nightclub DJing. I do a bit of these kind of mobile, like hired to play, to be the DJ, providing that service of being a DJ. But I like to exercise the artistic and creative freedom that the medium is as well.
That's great. On both ends of like as a more commercial facing DJ, and then like as a more like self-expressive DJ, there's definitely been changes in like the genres that are popular right now or that people like to listen to. Like recently there has been this sort of resurgence of, I guess, not just fast-paced, maybe like jungle or D&B, but also like dubstep and like it seems bass heavy forms of dance music.
Yeah.
Also elsewhere, like reggaeton is getting very popular right now as well.
Reggaeton. I'm a piano too.
Yeah, I'm a piano as well.
Yeah.
Afro house, kind music, that type of thing.
Yeah.
And so I was wondering, like,
So many edits.
It's so many
coming
edits,
out.
literally
There's a
so
lot of
many
DJs
edits.
I'll hear play just edits. Like,
Yeah.
it's cool. Like, I think it's cool to reinterpret
Yeah,
music,
definitely.
especially with like remixing and stuff.
Yeah, like in Richmond at least, do you see this like sort of genre shift as like? Do you think it's a very like explicit thing, or are people just slowly like sort of tuning into it?
That's a good question. I feel like there's a lot of DJs here in Richmond that are very tapped in with what's going on around the world. But yeah, if I were to like have the finger on the pulse of what's going on in Richmond, I'd say that especially in the underground, there's a very heavy techno scene that's like really popular here. I think it kind of makes sense with some of the industrial background of Richmond itself. There's the railroads and there are multiple crossings here in the city. It has that kind of industrial feeling when you're going around the city. And that's tied to its origins in Detroit, where techno, the birthplace of it. But yeah, I think that there are a lot of artists that are tapping into those kind of, so like kind of what you're saying is that these once underground trends or like subcultures are now being picked up into the mainstream. And I'm seeing, I don't honestly go and see a whole lot of mainstream DJs when I go and play. I think that I've been so inspired by some of the local DJs here and smaller, maybe even lesser known DJs that are willing to kind of push the envelope of what the medium is and do things that maybe someone playing for 10,000 people like in a stadium like may not. I don't know. I always like smaller spaces, I think.
Yeah, that's fair. Those are definitely like
rather than huge nightclubs.
Right. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, and so like on the topic of the underground scene, it's really interesting because me personally, I've not been to one of those underground raves, but I've heard lots about it. It's sort of like the stuff of legend among those in my like friend group there, where they talk about like there's a huge gritty techno set in front and there's drag racers behind you just spinning their wheels under like an abandoned bridge, like under a bridge or a warehouse or something like that. So I was like wondering like what have your interactions been with that scene? Have you like like drawn much inspiration from it in terms of
for sure. I think there's a lot of really amazing promoters, especially here in Richmond, that are pushing for inclusive type shows and parties. But oftentimes a lot of the roles of the promoter gets blended with the DJs who are also doing it. Richmond itself is a very small city. But it's still a city along the East Coast where you can easily get to Baltimore, DC, New York City, Philadelphia. So there's a lot of, I would say, I don't know if cross-pollination is the right word, but there's a lot more opportunities for DJs to come from these places and play here as well. Although I would say overall, there is a very prevalent, and I don't know, I wouldn't say it's new or anything, but Richmond for a long time has always been like a super DIY underground scene. House shows, or like you were saying, pop-up shows under a bridge or in a park, or there's daytime things that happen. There's that I'm a piano at sunset.
That's very
I would say that
So in that vein, I guess like I remember that recently you hosted like your first jungle show, and sort of getting into those genres like jungle and DMB, which are sort of like used interchangeably because they're kind of two. I imagine like what is your evaluation of like what that scene in Richmond is like, and yeah.
Well, I would say for sure something I learned about that show is that the scene is super niche. It's super like people, even though it's small, maybe not as much as like say techno or house in Richmond here. The fan base is incredibly dedicated because those events aren't as popular or prevalent. To see a larger name D&B act or like even a mid-tier D&B act, you a lot of times have to go to a bigger city. DC perhaps being one of the closest ones, but I've heard people going to North Carolina, up to DC, Baltimore, kind of like like I was talking about the East Coast corridor with all these cities among it. So. Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of the parties that I've personally organized through my radio show, Club Unity, I like to highlight certain genres, so that sometimes things will be genre specific, like that party was. So not every event is like that, but there were. It was kind of a convergence of. A friend had connected me with an artist that was going to be touring, and then that kind of coincided with a good opportunity for another DJ from out of town that I reached out to, and then it was like just a matter of getting some locals, and then boom, it happened. Like, it's like there's a certain, I don't know, I've been wanting to do one specifically like a jungle, and this one there was a bit of breakcore and D&B, so like it wasn't just a straight one genre party. It was like a lot of, I mean, breaks focus, but then doing a lot of different kind of flavors within that.
Yeah, that's fair.
It was a good time. It was a good time for sure. I mean,
yeah, that's good to hear. Yeah, so like when you did your jungle show, and I guess in your interactions with that scene, did you like notice certain trends of like who was coming out? Were they like of a certain age or a certain group or like a social category that I guess may have like inclined them towards like niche types of music?
Yeah, I mean, well, what's pretty amazing is that was a pretty like we always like to, and me and several of the other folks I collaborate with, we're always interested in like how people hear about an event, and so we'll often ask them. We've been posting some of the events on Resident Advisor as a way, as like a ticketing platform to be able to do things in advance, and ask how people find out about it. So some of them, at that show, they asked a lot about, or they said that they knew which DJ it was. If it was Joanna O, who used to own the Turnstile record store here in Richmond. She's very huge in the local D&B scene, has been pushing it here for a long time, almost as long as WRIR has been around. Her and her husband Jesse have had shows on WRIR, and have been pushing a lot of D&B breaks and other type of stuff. I mean, her shop was the one that you would go to back in the 2000s when it was open, to the early 2010s. If there was an underground rave happening, you could go and get a ticket for it there at her shop. So like she's definitely, and I was really glad that she was able to play that show as well, because a lot of the other artists were a lot younger, some around my age, and the other ones were touring artists. So it was kind of a fun mix and combination of a lot of different things coming together. But that's kind of how I feel like Club Unity, what I kind of have wanted Club Unity to be, is that glue that brings the different pieces together. Parties, radio, all giving its voice out there and everything here through WRIR now. Yeah,
that's cool. Yeah. So yeah, like as you said, Joanna O like has been pushing D&B for a long time. Jungle for a long time,
and she threw parties for a while too. I went to a few that were happening in this last year at Ember Music Hall.
Right, yeah, that's a really cool venue. Yeah, I was wondering, is there like, say Joanna may have seen jungle and D&B in a sort of like way, in the sense that maybe it was more British in terms of its origin. Like maybe a lot of people seem to view D&B and jungle in terms of sort of ethno-national idea, like it's tied to the idea of Britishness, having originated so much in like the underground scene in London and Bristol.
But mainly from its origins in dub and reggae.
Dub and reggae, yeah.
Right? So especially like raga jungle, and I mean jungle really more so than D and B. I don't know the origins of D and B as much. I'll have to honestly say, but yeah, I am kind of privy to the fact that it's a lot of the first wave Jamaican immigrants that came to the UK are responsible for that.
Yeah, and I was wondering, like, especially when you hear like raga vocals on like Original Nutta or something, and people sort of get this idea of it's like it is a classic. Like it's a very British or like Afro-British or Jamaican British type of music, and I was wondering, like, do people here, like, do your fellow DJs, do you view it in a sort of lens like that, like for a particular, like it's indicative of a particular identity?
Yeah, I think so. I think it definitely is important to honor the roots and the origins of that genre. That can go for a lot of genres of underground, especially like hard. You don't want to erase the history of a lot of hardworking, oftentimes queer or black DJs and artists that created these styles of music and these cultures that are around them. I think a lot of my gateway into it was through like learning about Chicago footwork, which is, I mean, its own kind of unique style to Chicago, like kind of with its origins in house and everything. But as far as it be like, so you're asking kind of if it's how that relates to the more like locale.
Yeah, like, is there sort of like an attempt in certain scenes, like in certain cities or in certain places, to sort of localize a sound, or to view DMV jungle, these like maybe outside coming in genres, as like a globalizing sound or something like that?
Yeah, that's a very that's an interesting question, because I noticed that there's a lot of hybrid genres nowadays. I mean, I know one thing that was really popular, maybe even like it started being popular 10 to 15 years ago, was the fusion of footwork and jungle, which is big. I mean, both genres are played very fast, like above 160 beats per minute usually. And so, but yeah, I definitely see that a lot in mainstream artists too, and mainstream and underground are the kind of like blurring of the lines of genre. Yeah. Not necessarily erasing them in all cases, but
that's fair.
The fusion of it all. Like there's like breakcore. I mean, that's like an example of like where it's a mess of a lot of everything. D&B and jungle and hardcore.
Yeah. And like similarly, there are like, I guess, tied to the sort of ethno-national view of British jungle and DMB. There's this, I guess, there are two opposing views of DMB and jungle. One of it being very cosmopolitan, very futuristic, and like tied as well to house or like all the other burgeoning EDM, like dance music genres of that period. Yeah. And the other one was sort of like true to the name jungle, like it was sort of going back to a more traditional, more like for lack of a better word, like seemingly primitive view of like dance music. And I was just wondering, do DJs and listeners in Richmond look at it as like that sort of cosmopolitan thing?
I don't really know. I think, the people that I've met that are really into it are like super duper into it. And it could be like there's a lot of because like, I mean, a lot of the original tracks that we're talking about were made in the 90s. Yeah. And so artists that are still making that kind of sound, it's almost like a current jungle revival is happening. And so as far as the like discussions about it here in Richmond, I think it's a mixed bag based on like who you're talking to. Okay. Because some people will like I don't know, don't want to get into it as much, or they just want to kind of honor what was, and like there are a lot of artists, but there's also like new artists that are pushing what's new and still are like at the forefront of it and still and like making it and kind of carrying on a legacy of something. I haven't personally got into many discussions about the ethno nationalism discussion and how that split has occurred.
Yeah. That's fair.
Yeah.
And I guess like one question about DMB and jungle has been, because it originates in like these sort of subaltern communities in the UK, and it was sort of imported here as like as a genre that was enjoyed mainly by like say the younger college going educated classes or working class people. There seems to be this notion that jungle and DMB are sort of tied to political visions in a sense, that they're like revolutionary or something, and there have been articles online and in magazines before saying,
I've definitely heard that about raving period, like because that's so ingrained, those genres are so ingrained into just rave culture in general, right?
And I was just wondering, like, so far in what you've seen like in those scenes, are people conscious about like do people think that, or do people enjoy these genres partially because of like its political
absolutely absolutely. I think I mean it's there's a large split in nightlife because a lot of people will sometimes use nightlife as just escapism to like not think about those particular implications or things. And then there are people who take great pride in like, like, no, like we need to be celebrating this and like honoring it and like talking about it. So I mean, and educating others about the history of it. Whichever culture it kind of is.
That's right.
And I mean, I definitely have like seen both in Richmond. There are people who definitely like love bass music and are really into that, and just it's like that. But I feel like that lacks a bit of intention.
Yeah,
with it,
Yeah, that's true. Especially opposed to like that view of like DMB and jungle as like political music. So there's this like like there is the idea that people like these faster like genres potentially because of the like some sort of need for speed, that they like going, like they like the fact that it's going faster, or like or the bass or the particular sound of it, I guess. And like what comes to mind is like, I think there was a movie back a few years ago called like We Are Your Friends or something, and it was about basically a DJ who Zac Efron plays, and there's a scene in it where he sort of explains how people's enjoyment of house or certain genres are tied to like the heartbeat that they like, like their heartbeat and goes up. And
I've heard
like
that like 120 beats per minute is
120.
like
and then
very similar to the human heart.
Exactly. And so I was wondering, like, do you think listeners are mediating, like they're balancing between like an enjoyment for political purposes in terms of like honoring and celebrating the origins, but also like some sort of just on its own isolated enjoyment of the sound itself, or like the the speed of the like, what do you think?
I think that I think it's important to do both, honestly. Like, it should be fun and an enjoyable thing that can be like still honoring it and like the culture or whoever is pushing it now and all that. You definitely want to pay homage to the OGs that came before, but I don't know.
That's fair. So on like the fact that these underground musics are being pulled out into the mainstream.
I think that's what upsets me a lot, and like especially I'm sure is upsetting for people who are the originators of these things and the genres, right? Like I mean, I'm somewhat familiar with club music from
Yeah.
Baltimore, Jersey, and Philly, and I know that a lot of times the vocal samples of a lot of these popular artists, like Rai Rai's voice, it's popular in a lot of Baltimore and Jersey club music, but she doesn't. It's not, and artists like even Drake or
Yeah.
Nicki Minaj have like used like some of the biggest artists in these genres. You know, I don't know if there's any money going towards the artists.
Yeah.
Or, you know, like it's an unfortunate thing that is
Yeah.
know,
Yeah, I suppose
when it's on that large of a scale.
Yeah.
That like what are those people doing to contribute to the culture?
Yeah, that's true. And like, I guess you partially predicted the question I was gonna come up, but
Yeah.
I was just thinking, like, yeah, do you consider like there to be a certain, I guess, appeal or a benefit to underground music staying underground in a sort of way, or like, yeah, like, what do you think about sort of the tension between, oh, it's like in a sense it's being removed from its original context.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I would definitely say that, like, if you're not, I mean, so there are a lot of DJs. I don't know. I just remember hearing DJ Sega talk about in a speech once about how, like, you know, the reason it's called Philly club music is because I live in Philly. You know, like, and so, I mean, especially it's interesting with jungle because it is like. It is was originated in Europe, so like I think that any, I mean, but yeah, I mean, like I feel like you could go back and forth a lot because there's a lot of artists, even like you know maybe the artist that could like disprove that would be an example of like Todd Edwards because he's a UK garage legend, but he's from New Jersey and he's lived there all his life. Like he didn't play in the UK until he had already like made music, made garage, and so it just picked up there because it was kind of like house, but it was like the UK's version of what house music was that came from Chicago.
Yeah.
Right? So, man, I don't know. I feel like it's a question or a topic that goes back and forth along a lot, you know, just because DJing is so big, it's so worldwide. There's like millions of people that do it or participate in it in some capacity or thing.
That's true. And like it seems definitely that like the like preferences, people's preferences maybe here compared to elsewhere definitely sort of like coming together in a sort of way.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah, and I was like wondering, like how, like what are the differences you see right now in terms of like what people like to listen here versus maybe DC, Baltimore, like the neighboring big city scenes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I know that like up in Baltimore. So I've DJ'd. I'm about to DJ in DC this weekend, and then I've played a couple shows in Baltimore, and I've got a lot of friends up in those areas too that do DJ or promote and do other things. So, I would, you know, in talking to them, I think that Richmond just overall is it in the nature of it being smaller. There is a bit of a ceiling in some of the music that can be like deemed lucrative or like what can be considered mainstream. And I guess, you know, as DJing and nightlife and underground stuff has become more popular as a whole, like just in general, electronic music period is like selling more, it's charting way more. I think it, you know, the as far as the size of some of the venues or some of the artists and stuff, you know, there is a bit of a ceiling here compared to some of the other larger cities. DC's pretty big, and like they can definitely get some big name DJs and artists to roll through there that just may not have that audience here in
yeah.
Richmond.
Mm-hmm.
Just a few weeks ago, went and saw DJ Shadow play. He's like a trip hop producer, but has like branched into a lot of different genres. But he's been making music since the maybe even the 80s. Like maybe he was DJing back in the 80s. But yeah, it's like even that. You know, it seems like it's kind of like a small, like more niche kind of thing.
Yeah.
Turntablism.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like it seemed like when one gets that question about like preferences, part of it just the discussion just seems to naturally lead into the question of like social pressure. Like say like if you are playing at a commercial gig, you feel like a certain voice in the back of your head telling you, should you play this next song? If it's a bit too I guess musically not as popular as like the top 40 or maybe something like that. And I was wondering like do you, because I remember you said that on one hand you play certain gigs where it's like you ask you ask beforehand what the preferences are and sort of you have an idea of what to play, but in other cases like say maybe like your Helen's studio
like if I were to get booked for a show,
without like I guess any like specific, like maybe in a random bar or a club, like in those sorts of sets, do you feel that sort of pressure, or like how does it structure like what you
yeah I mean, there's a lot of things to consider because kind of what we were saying earlier about DJs contributing so much to an atmosphere of a space, of a setting. You want to make sure it's like reflected in the space of what it is. I think it comes down to shared values, really. What are the values of the space? What are the values of the people that are playing the music, as well as the people that are there hearing and like receiving the music? I think the times that I enjoy my sets the most are when those values are shared and mutual, be it like love and caring and community. I mean, I like playing at bars because they allow me chances to experiment and try new things and still be receptive into the whole like audience participation thing. But it feels very different. Like I wouldn't really go in and play the same type of set at the bar that I hold a residency at that I would at maybe a gig I got booked out of town for or something, or even on my radio show. It's just all parts of the wheel, like say, that like just keeps it turning. I think in my head,
That's right. And like, so I guess looking to the future, like what do you see the Richmond sort of dance music scene going into in maybe like the next year or two potentially, or if you wanted to go more longer.
Sure, yeah. Future. What does the future for Richmond hold? I mean, certainly in WRAR's capacity, I like really would love to see volunteership grow as well, and like people be involved in community things here in Richmond. I think that their dance music has been especially utilized, and I think that namely Angel and the Ice Cream Social Group did a lot to change this in Richmond and turn nightlife and parties and events into means for fundraising and mutual aid. So a lot of the time, I mean, shows didn't have that kind of purpose or calling maybe before then, but it was like the money went to whoever organized the show. But I think that she certainly did, and the Ice Cream Social Collective, they're a queer DJ collective here in Richmond and some beyond as well, beyond Richmond. But I'd like to see that, especially with the uncertainty that the future holds, that like nightlife can still be that for like there still be community driven either like education or fundraising or
that's great
services and stuff. I think, and I would love to see more more unity, you know, in Richmond.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of people really doing great things, but it is still very small.
Like very like still niche sort of communities, right?
Yeah. There was a long time OG DJ that I talked to at one point who said some very encouraging things to me before I really got my feet wet with organizing shows, and that was that Richmond itself is a whiteboard, and you're holding the expo marker. It's like you really kind of have. It's not a much larger city like Los Angeles or New York where it's so saturated with events going on every single day of the week.
Yeah.
Like it's different.
Yeah.
It's you do have some more freedom to create what it is you want in those spaces. So, you know, as like someone who really cares about community safety and like organizing safe ways to party, you know, and getting people involved, because it's way too much just to do on your own. I kind of learned that the hard way, and I've been glad to have the amazing support of many people here in the community.
That's great. Yeah. So like, if you have anything else that you want to add to the interview, I mean, by all means, go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, I really appreciate the opportunity to speak here. You know, I think for me, the time that I like experienced like jungle, because I had really heard about it, but I haven't been to a big drum and bass show or a jungle show until I went to the UK last year, and that's when I went to. And I've seen some jungle DJs, like hardcore DJs, and some more like rave style DJs. There's parties up in DC. I mean, I can't say I've seen a lot of jungle here, but I know that locally they're doing events at the RVA Boombox. I think they've mainly been happening on Wednesdays, but they do live streams of like local D&B artists. What was I saying? Oh yeah, so in 2023 I went with several friends from America to the Bang Face Weekender, and there were it's a neo rave, so there's a lot of old school like jungle, drum and bass, really any genre. I mean, rave and adjacent. And then there's like a bunch of new school, like the revival that we were talking about. And like, it was so cool to have them all in one place. You could go from one room and hear the sickest jungle, like Sunday afternoon. I remember going from like Sunday jungle vibe to like, they'll have like donk in another room and have like donk edits. And then you can go and there's breakcore happening in another room, and then you go and then there's like the sickest like techno or like hardcore DJ.
Like
it was so fun. It was like it was like more than I'd ever experienced, and it was incredible. I mean, you got to see DJs, play music that they produced, or like just like raving.
That's fair. Yeah, hopefully something like that comes up here. Who knows? Potentially.
Yeah. I would definitely hope so.
It was good talking to you. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you, Larry.
Thank you.
Yeah.